The fluorescent lights of Landstuhl Regional Medical Center hummed a monotonous, indifferent tune. For Nurse Clara Hayes, it was the soundtrack of her invisibility. At 52, with premature gray streaking her tightly bound hair and a subtle limp she couldn't quite hide, she was a ghost haunting the edges of the trauma bay. Her hands, scarred and often trembling, were seen as a sign of weakness, of age, of nerves unsuited for the high-stakes world of critical care. She moved slowly, deliberately, a stark contrast to the caffeinated energy of the younger nurses and resident doctors who orbited the brilliant, arrogant star that was Dr. Sterling Thorne. Thorne was a man sculpted from ego and Ivy League credentials. A top civilian trauma surgeon on a lucrative contract, he treated the military hospital as his personal fiefdom and its staff as his court jesters. He particularly enjoyed using Clara as a punchline. "Hayes," he'd barked earlier that evening, his voice echoing in the cavernous bay. "I need a half-normal saline drip. Think your arthritic fingers can manage that before the patient's next birthday?" A few of the younger staff had snickered. Jessica, a nurse barely out of her 20s, had smirked openly. Clara had simply nodded, her eyes downcast. "Yes, doctor." She'd retrieved the bag, her movements precise, economical, a lifetime of practice hidden in the quiet shuffle of her orthopedic shoes. The tremor in her hands was there, a constant companion, but it vanished the moment she touched medical equipment. No one ever noticed. They only saw the quiet, slow, old woman. They didn't see the hypervigilance in her eyes, constantly scanning the room, assessing threats, mapping exits. They mistook PTSD for geriatric anxiety. The first sign of the coming storm was a sound, a deep percussive thump, thump, thump that vibrated through the window panes, a Black Hawk flying low and fast. Then, two more. The crash phone rang, a shrill cry that cut through the nightly lull. Dr. Thorne snatched it up. "Trauma 1, Thorne speaking." He listened, his posture straightening, a predator scenting blood. "Yes, understood. ETA, 2 minutes. We'll be ready." He slammed the phone down, his eyes gleaming with a manic fire. This was his stage. "All right, people, listen up. We have a priority 1 inbound. Marine Colonel, multiple GSWs, caught in an IED blast in Syria. This is a big one, so I want my A-team. Jessica, you're on airway. Greg, push meds. Hayes." He paused, looking at her with theatrical disdain. "You're on cleanup. Try not to get any of your dust in the wounds." The insult landed with its usual quiet thud. Clara just nodded again, moving to the periphery to check the crash cart, ensuring every ampule, every needle, every packet of gauze was perfectly aligned. It was a habit born not of obsessive compulsion, but of a life where a misplaced piece of gear meant a dead teammate. "Check your kit. Check it again. A lazy check is a dead man." The voice of her old Master Chief echoed in her mind, a ghost from another life. The roar of the helicopter rotors became deafening, shaking the very foundations of the hospital. Wind and rain lashed against the glass as the medevac bird touched down on the rooftop pad. The doors to the trauma bay burst open and the world dissolved into controlled chaos. A team of para-rescue men, their faces grim and streaked with grime, wheeled in a gurney. On it, barely recognizable as a man, was the colonel. He was a mess of blood, torn multicam, and hastily applied field dressings. An IV line snaked from his arm, the bag nearly empty. His breathing was a ragged, wet gasp. The PJ team leader started rattling off the report, a staccato burst of battlefield medicine. "Colonel James Bulldog Rourke, 3 GSWs to the torso, 1 to the left femur. Possible tension pneumothorax on the right side. BP is 80 over palp, heart rate 140 and thready. We pushed 2 units of ONEG and a gram of TXA in the field, but he's still bleeding out." Thorne shoved the PJ aside. "I've got it from here, Sergeant. This is my house now." He began his assessment, his movements flashy but inefficient. He was a surgeon, a man of scalpels and sterile fields. This raw, dirty battlefield trauma was outside his polished comfort zone. He barked orders, calling for X-rays, for blood, for scans. He was following a civilian protocol, a checklist that didn't account for the brutal realities of modern warfare. Clara watched from the edge of the room, her heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against her ribs. Her trembling hands were still now, balled into tight fists at her sides. She could see what Thorne was missing. The distended neck veins, the tracheal deviation, subtle but there, the paradoxical movement of his chest. The man on the table wasn't just bleeding out, he was suffocating. His lung had collapsed, and every ragged breath was pumping more air into his chest cavity, crushing his heart and his good lung. The colonel's eyes fluttered open, hazy with pain and morphine. He saw Thorne leaning over him, a well-groomed man with soft hands and panicked eyes. Then his gaze drifted past the doctor, finding Clara in the background. His eyes, even clouded, were sharp. They were the eyes of a commander, a man used to assessing people in a single glance. He saw her posture, the way she stood at a modified parade rest. He saw the scars peeking from her collar. He saw something familiar in the quiet intensity of her gaze. His voice was a gravelly whisper, but it carried the weight of command. "Get someone else," he rasped, looking directly at Thorne. "Get me a real medic." Thorne scoffed, his ego pricked. "He's delirious from blood loss. Greg, push another 50 of fentanyl." "No," Clara said. The word was quiet, almost a whisper, but it cut through the noise of the trauma bay like a razor. Every head turned. Dr. Thorne spun around, his face contorted in a mask of pure fury. "What did you just say, Nurse Hayes?" he hissed, his voice dangerously low. "I said no," she repeated, her voice clearer now, firmer. She took a step forward out of the shadows. "You push more fentanyl. You'll suppress his respiratory drive and kill him. He doesn't need painkillers. He needs a chest needle." Thorne's face turned a blotchy red. "You are a nurse. You will not countermand my orders in my trauma bay. I am the attending physician here. You are a liability, a fossil who should have retired a decade ago. Now get out of my way before I have you fired and your license revoked." The colonel on the table was shaking his head weakly, his eyes fixed on Clara. "Listen to her," he gasped. Just then, the monitors shrieked in unison. The colonel's BP bottomed out. His heart rate spiked into a lethal arrhythmia. VTAC. "He's coding. Get the paddles," Thorne screamed, panicking. "It's not his heart, it's pressure." Clara's voice was no longer quiet. It was a roar, a command tone forged in the crucible of 100 firefights. "It's pulseless electrical activity from the tension pneumo. The paddles will do nothing. You're wasting time." But Thorne was already grabbing the defibrillator paddles, fumbling with the gel. "Clear!" he yelled. Clara moved. It wasn't the slow, limping shuffle of the old nurse. It was an explosion of purpose. She covered the 10 feet between them in 3 fluid steps, her limp gone, replaced by the efficient gait of a trained operator. She didn't shove Thorne. She didn't hit him. She simply placed her hand on his forearm, intercepting the paddles just as he was about to press them to the colonel's chest. Her grip was like iron. Thorne froze, shocked by the strength in the old woman's hand. He looked down and saw her knuckles, white and scarred. He looked up into her eyes and saw a person he had never seen before. The fear, the timidity, was gone. In its place was a cold blue fire, a chilling certainty. "I will not let you kill this man," she said, her voice dropping to a low, lethal calm. She pushed his arm away with contemptuous ease. She turned to the stunned room. "Somebody get me a 14-gauge angiocath and a bottle of betadine, now." For a heartbeat, nobody moved. They were paralyzed, caught between the hospital's rigid hierarchy and the absolute authority radiating from this woman they thought they knew. It was one of the PJs who broke the spell. He'd seen that look before, in the eyes of legends. He grabbed the needle from the cart and slapped it into her hand. "Here, ma'am." Clara took it without looking. She ripped open the colonel's uniform with one practiced tear, exposing the right side of his chest. As her scrub sleeve rode up her forearm, a piece of ink, dark against her pale skin, was revealed. It was a skull inside a spade with crossed daggers, the MARSOC Raider insignia. One of the colonel's men, a master sergeant who had accompanied him from the field, was standing guard by the door. His eyes widened, his jaw dropping in disbelief. "Holy!" Clara ignored him. Her focus was absolute. She located the second intercostal space in the midclavicular line with 2 fingers. There was no hesitation, no tremor, just the fluid, confident motion of muscle memory honed by countless repetitions under fire. She plunged the long needle into the colonel's chest, there. A distinct pop, then an audible hiss, like air escaping a punctured tire. It was the sound of life returning. The pressure inside the colonel's chest cavity vented into the room. On the monitor, the deadly arrhythmia instantly broke. His blood pressure began to climb from nothing. His oxygen saturation jumped 10 points, then 20. Clara worked with a terrifying grace, her hands a blur. Chest tube tray, 36 French, and get me 2 large-bore IVs. I want pressure bags on both. We're switching to a massive transfusion protocol, 1:1:1, plasma, platelets, and packed cells. Someone get on the phone to the OR, tell them to prep for a thoracotomy and an X-lap. I've stopped the primary bleed, but he's got at least 1 more in the abdomen. She was no longer Nurse Hayes, she was a force of nature. The entire room, including the arrogant Dr. Thorne, could only watch in stunned silence as she single-handedly stabilized a man who had been minutes from death. She moved around the gurney, her hands identifying injuries with a tactile sensitivity that no X-ray could match. She found the femoral bleed Thorne had overlooked, applying direct pressure with a practiced efficiency that immediately slowed the blood pooling on the floor. The Master Sergeant finally found his voice. He took a hesitant step forward, his eyes locked on the tattoo, then on her face. He spoke the name with a reverence reserved for myths. "Ma'am, are you Valkyrie?" Clara didn't look up from her patient. "Focus on your commander, Master Sergeant," she said, her voice tight with concentration. But it was all the confirmation he needed. He snapped to attention, his back ramrod straight. The name echoed in the silent room. Valkyrie, a call sign spoken in hushed tones in the special operations community. A legendary combat medic, a ghost who had operated in the darkest corners of the world, credited with impossible saves under unimaginable conditions. A woman thought to be long dead or disappeared. Dr. Thorne stood frozen, his face a pale mask of confusion and horror. His entire world, built on credentials and protocol, had just been shattered by the quiet old nurse he had tormented for months. His authority had evaporated. He was a bystander in his own trauma bay. The heavy doors at the end of the hall burst open again. This time, it wasn't medical staff. It was a group of men who moved with the quiet lethality of apex predators. They wore civilian clothes, jeans and tactical jackets, but they carried themselves like soldiers. Their leader, a man with a thick beard and eyes that had seen too much, strode into the room. His gaze swept over the scene, assessing it in a fraction of a second. He saw the wounded colonel, the stunned medical staff, the pale-faced Dr. Thorne, and finally Clara, her hands covered in blood, working on the patient. A slow smile spread across the man's face, a look of profound relief and disbelief. He walked directly to her, ignoring everyone else as if they were furniture. "Clara," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Valkyrie, I'll be damned. We heard a rumor you were working here." Clara finally looked up, her work done for the moment. She gave him a tired, thin smile. "Had to be somewhere, Chief. Can't sit still." The man, a Command Master Chief from SEAL Team 6, placed a hand on her shoulder. "You just saved the head of MARSOC, you know that?" He then turned, his gaze falling upon the still-frozen Dr. Thorne. The smile vanished, replaced by a gaze as cold and hard as chipped granite. "Who's in charge here?" he demanded. Thorne, finding a sliver of his old arrogance, puffed out his chest. "I am. I am Dr. Sterling Thorne, Chief of Trauma, Sir..." The Master Chief cut him off with a slice of his hand. "I don't give a damn who you are. The woman you have been obstructing is Lieutenant Commander Clara Hayes, United States Navy, retired." He let the rank hang in the air, a heavy, tangible thing. She was the senior enlisted leader and chief medical officer for a Tier 1 JSOC task force for 10 years. She's a Silver Star and 2-time Navy Cross recipient. The protocols for massive hemorrhage that your hospital uses, she helped write them. On a napkin in the back of a C-130 after pulling 3 of my guys out of a burning building in Fallujah. Every word was a hammer blow, dismantling Thorne's reality piece by piece. The younger nurses, Jessica and Greg, looked like they wanted the floor to swallow them whole. They hadn't just mocked a coworker, they had mocked a decorated war hero. A living legend. The Master Chief wasn't finished. He took a step closer to Thorne, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "That man on the table owes her his life. The only reason you're not being charged with negligent homicide right now is because she was here to clean up your mess. So you are going to give her anything she needs. You are going to follow her every order, and then you are going to disappear. Am I clear?" Thorn could only nod, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. The master sergeant by the door, tears welling in his eyes, rendered a sharp, perfect salute to Clara's back. "Ma'am," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Clara finished applying a final dressing, her work complete. The colonel was stable, his vitals holding steady. She straightened up, her back aching, the adrenaline beginning to fade. She looked at the master sergeant, then at the master chief. She saw the respect, the awe in their eyes, the same respect she hadn't felt in years. She then allowed her gaze to drift over to Dr. Thorne. He flinched, unable to meet her eyes. There was no triumph in her expression, no "I told you so," just a profound, bone-deep weariness. The quiet life she had tried to build for herself was over. The ghost was visible again. "He's ready for the OR," she said, her voice once again quiet, but now it was a quiet that commanded the room. "Let's move." And as they wheeled Colonel Rourke towards the elevators, the entire trauma team, from the PJs to the nurses, parted for her like the sea before Moses. Dr. Sterling Thorne was left standing alone in the middle of the blood-spattered room, a ghost in his own kingdom, utterly and completely invisible.